Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this morning's breakfast. My name is Niamh King. I'm the Vice President for Programmes and Strategic Content here at the Chicago Council. And we are absolutely delighted to welcome back to the Council the Taoiseach of Ireland, Enda Kenny. We've hosted him once before, and it's important conversations like these today that help deepen the bilateral relationship and strengthen the friendship and understanding between the US and Ireland. It's been a big weekend. I think I understood that the Taoiseach was at the U2 concert last night. I didn't realize he had to come 4,000 miles to go to U2. Is the rumor true? So we've had a big, a second St. Patrick's Day weekend here in Chicago. Also, we'd like to welcome Ambassador Anne Anderson, who's also been a great friend of the Council and a speaker here before, and the rest of the delegation. And here in town, the Consulate are our amazing friends, Consul General Brian O'Brien and Vice Consul Ragnar Almquist. Thank you very much for working with us on this. We are on the record, but please silence your phones, and a video recording will be made available after this. A few things. This week is a huge week for us here at the Council and Chicago. The Chicago Forum on Global Cities will commence on Wednesday night. If you haven't heard about it, check out chicagoforum.org. We have loads of events going on. We're doing it this week with the Financial Times. We have about 60 speakers in town covering a broad range of topics. I'd encourage you to attend one, if not all, of the sessions. Just a brief programming note. Views expressed by individuals we host are their own and do not reflect the institutional positions of the Council. Now, our distinguished guest. Enda Kenny is the Taoiseach, the Prime Minister of Ireland since February 2011. He was re-elected for a second term in May 2016. He's the longest-serving Taoiseach in the history of his party, Fine Gael, of which he was elected leader in 2002. Since 2011, he's overseen the Irish economy's return to positive growth and reduced unemployment, the early exit from an IMF support programme and successful return to the international money markets, and Ireland's successful presidency of the EU. He previously served in a number of ministries, including tourism and trade, and he was first elected to the Dáil, which is the Irish Parliament, in 1975, and is now its longest-serving member. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Taoiseach Enda Kenny to the Council.
Thank you very much, Niamh. Ivo, thank you for the invitation. Ambassadors, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, I was at the concert last night. My favourite song is the one that says, I still haven't found what I'm looking for. Came here a few years ago to Chicago and really enjoyed the experience. When I went down to meet Mayor Emanuel, he gave me a CD of Springsteen's, and on it was written, "From one boss to another." So after 42 years of life as a public representative and 15 years as leader of the party and 6 years as Taoiseach, I'm happy to pass on responsibility to the next generation, given the fact that we have retrieved our sovereignty, we've restored our economic independence, and we've given our flag back to our people with a measure of dignity and respect. So that's where the focus at home is for the moment. I might just say that this is an opportunity to express my thanks to the people of Chicago here, a wonderful city, one of the great cities of the world, a sister city of Galway in Ireland. I'm quite sure you'll have a lot of collaboration between here in 2020 with the European City of Culture when that goes to Galway's shores. But also it's a hugely significant and important city in the context of Ireland, Irishness, and the cooperation and the traditional links between Ireland and the United States for so many reasons. And where I come from, in County Mayo on the west coast of Ireland, this city has had extraordinary links for 2.5 centuries with the entire West, and we greatly value and appreciate those contacts over the years, what America has allowed Ireland to do, and how the part that Irish people have played and continue to play in the life and society of this great city, this great state, this great country, and we hope we'll continue to be able to play that in the future. So if you eat silently, you might hear some words here. We could choose different themes to speak about. Global uncertainty, we live in a very fragile world now. The question of Brexit and what that means and the implications for the United States. The issues of global terrorism, the phenomenon of migration and what it means. Indeed, the future of work itself, given the digitization and the fourth industrial revolution of the cloud. And I suppose the place of America in the world and the part that it must and should be able to play for the time ahead. So a young man, a young boy who grew up in Oak Park, just a few miles west of this city, wrote, "If you are lucky enough to have lived in Paris as a young man, then wherever you go for the rest of your life, it stays with you. For Paris is a movable feast. The writer of those words was Ernest Hemingway. And he was right, because Paris is movable. But Paris is not removable, neither for the planet nor for those of us who call this planet home, as the people of this magnificent city of Chicago and of this great country of America know really well. Because across the world now, if you look for degrees of certainty, then you have to look east to Europe, specifically to a Dutchman and to a Swede, Daniel Fahrenheit and Anders Celsius. It's regrettable that while our planet's heating up at an alarming pace, the politics of what we call the developed world has found an alternative for the science of what you might call exact thermometry. That is the interrogating of personal voters in a democracy about how warm or how cold or even how tepid they might feel when they listen to certain politicians or hear certain political statements or encounter particular political brands. Because such thermometry packages people in democracies, in republics, as products to be graded and bought and consumed and discarded. And that grading of politicians is degrading of politics and of public life, because it diminishes voters to the status of what you might call passive consumers. And it restricts courageous citizens within the fears of the old politics and the marketeers of that old politics. And it consigns citizens to having a role of audience and spectators. So at a time when scientific facts determine very clearly that polar ice continues to melt, that glaciers keep shrinking or continue to shrink at alarming pace, the grazing territories turn a little more to dust, more people become displaced, and Europe wonders whether this might be another summer season when parts of the Mediterranean will be hit by the kind of rainfall that you usually associate with the Philippines or the Himalayas. Very different world than even in this lifetime we grew up in. At the same time here, in this United States of America, men on a train were stabbed to death for defending Muslim women from a white supremacist. Innocent citizens have been killed, murdered recently in Manchester, in London, following on what happened in Paris and in Brussels and in Stockholm and in other places. And proud citizens of the UK or France or here in the US were catcalled in the streets and told, why don't you just go home? Only in Paris or in London or in Dublin or in Chicago, that's exactly where they were, or at least where they imagined themselves to be, at home. We forget the lessons of history at our peril, the lessons of Nazism, outbreaks of communism, and all these things that have happened within the lifetimes of people. And if we don't understand our history, if we don't learn those lessons, then we take a continuous journey into the unknown. And it's important that those lessons be understood and taken to heart. So what is our home? For me, it's always been for people who believe in democracy. And I believe that our home is at the center of that democracy. If you leave people in ghettos or banlieues, as they say in France, and ignore them for 20 years or more, it's difficult to accept that they will turn out as model citizens. So the voices of government, the voices of democratic governments, have to listen to other voices, discordant or otherwise, decide to act in people's interests. So I believe our home is at the center, is at the very center, is the center, which is why in the time ahead we have to seek to find common ground, a center ground, and make that ground our own ground. And we must do that not as some sort of abstract idea or a political position, but as a community of peoples, local to global. Ireland's been transformed by virtue of its membership of the European Union. If you were there 50 years ago, you'd have found a backward, introverted, protectionist country driven by a very traditional type agri-sector. But because America decided to invest in Europe, America decided to invest through Ireland into Europe, as is an English-speaking country, and the contacts and the connections that we've had for 2.5 centuries. It was very fitting for America to do that. And that's why over 700 American companies now based in Ireland employ over 150,000 people directly, and have given over those years an opportunity for people to grow and follow their dreams in our own country. And that's happened because 500 or more companies here in America that are Irish employ almost 100,000 people across 50 states. It shows you that when ideas and objectives can meet, where people can collaborate and cooperate, the results can be beneficial on both sides. So when we say, who is my brother and who is my sister, our country's changed. You go into classrooms of primary schools now, you might find 20, 30 different nationalities. You might find 20 languages. It's not the way it used to be, and it will never be the way it used to be, because the world is changing, smaller, more spontaneous contact and connection. So we've difficulties and challenges in Europe. The European Union of 500 million people, 28 countries, is governed by agreed European Union treaties. Those treaties say that you can join the Union under certain conditions, but you can also leave. And when people don't appreciate the extent of what democratic decisions can mean, in Britain, when the question was put, do you want to continue as a member of the European Union or do you not? The answer was to leave. When Article 50, which governs those treaties, was written, nobody ever expected a country to leave the European Union. But now it's happening, and this process is a step into the unknown, because so many things were not thought of, so many things were not considered. The engagement of political parties was not the way it should be. Citizens were not informed of the truth and the facts and so many of the issues that they were being asked to decide on. And now we face clouds of confusion and consternation, not just for Britain, not just for the relationship between Britain and Ireland, not just for the relationship between Britain and the European Union, but for Britain and the world. We have the closest possible contacts with the United Kingdom. We sympathise and empathise with Prime Minister May today and yesterday on the terrorist incident in London and last week in Manchester, and with all the other countries that have had these tragic occurrences in the past period. But Ireland will stay as a member of the European Union and negotiate on the Brexit issue as a member of the European Union. And we've had full support from all our colleagues on the principal priorities that apply to Ireland. That is the relationship between our country and Britain, our biggest and nearest trading partner, the border question, where when Brexit is completed, the only internal land border in the European Union will be in Ireland. The common travel area, which applies, Ivo, since this organisation was founded back in 1922, common travel area between Ireland and Britain means that Irish people or British people can go live in each other's country, work in each other's country, reside in each other's country, and draw social benefits in each other's country. We want to maintain that as a bilateral operation, but we negotiate from the European Union perspective. So this is causing real challenges because it's going to be quite complex. And we've had the priorities set out on those issues of the border, the common travel area, our relations with Britain, but our place in the European Union in future. So obviously, if political parties do not explain to people what is the nature and the consequences of the question they're being asked, you can have unforeseen outcomes. And the question to be decided over negotiations which will last a number of years is, what is that relationship going to be? Because Britain was never a country on its own. It was always the central part of an empire, or part of the European Union. So these questions, unanswered, are steps into the unknown. And we negotiate now from a position of strength of where we are. But if people are not heeded, if those discordant voices are not listened to, what happens is that they get driven right or left. To the left by a rhetoric of rage, and that pretends to righteousness and unity, but is in fact replete with cynical dismay, alienation, and deliberate disillusion. And they're being pushed to the right with this elitism, ignorance and hate masquerading as values that pretend to be traditional or democratic, honest or liberating or popular. And if you miss all of the centre, where the vast majority of people are and want to be, the challenge of politics is to explain that there is a better future, and that's by collaboration, by cooperation, and by achieving the common objectives of our common humanity, if you like. It's not just enough to claim the centre ground. You have to make that centre ground radical in its own sense. And that's why I often describe it as the radical centre, where voices that might not normally be heard are listened to and acted upon. Because a radical centre can change jobs and prosperity. It can bring about renewal and pride and belonging and kindness that are rooted, if you like, in the generous values of community, centred on the person who knows and feels that they are part and vitally a part of something actually bigger than themselves. It's the kind of radical centre that acts on the basis that nobody lives their lives within the confines of their balance sheet, that no man or woman or child can ever be consigned or confined to a column that is marked profit and loss. I believe that we have to return to politics at almost a philosophical plane so that we can make it work for people and work with people as they ask and live out the fundamental questions that people always ask themselves. What are we doing here? What's my responsibility? What is our role? What can we do as people who share a common thread? Obviously, before we leave this mortal world, you're not going to say to yourself, I'm thrilled I never had a holiday because I wanted to give the money to the bank, or I'm so glad I took my neighbour to court on that occasion, or I'm so happy that I spent hours on the politics and the intrigue of the office. What do people talk about when they get together? What do they need to talk about when they get together? What is happening now in the shopping malls across America as digitization and online shopping is creating situations where work is vanishing that was there for years? The future of work, robotics, data analytics, artificial intelligence, all of these things are changing the very nature of the world we live in. And that means that the best and most imaginative and creative minds have got to get together, allied to effective politics to provide futures for hundreds of millions of people. I think that, people live their lives reflecting on the question of family, their children, their broader family issues. And they remember with a great sense of pride and pleasure, I'm sure, the little incidents that brought about changes in those young people's lives, and rightly so. And isn't that part of what we try to do, to lead, to demonstrate, to show that there's a better way on these things? So family occasions are so important in that sense. And that's where it's in that centre space that we've got to stand and fight and deliver, because that's where the politics of the new and radical centre has got to be. And as we do, we have to have the courage and the humility to say that we have never had the certainty available to us to do everything right. And it does take, in politics, a sense of understanding that you can't be right all the time. You've got to make choices, and many of them are very difficult. But you have to have the humility to say, I didn't have all the answers, and nobody has, because we don't have that degree of certainty. And just like Fahrenheit and Celsius, when they were setting out the exactitude of thermometry, we don't have that degree of certainty about what the future holds. In fact, we mightn't even have a nodding acquaintance with what the world might be like in 20 years' time or 50 years' time, given the nature of how change can happen so effectively. Uncertainty can be shattering for people's lives. And that's why politics have got to work hard at what that certainty might be. So we've got to have, if you like, a moral duty here, and that applies in politics and in government, and that's to reduce suffering and provide opportunity for so many people. And if it's not, then the centre that W.B. Yeats, one of our Nobel laureates, wrote about, he said that the centre cannot hold if it's all falling apart. Clearly, we have to see that that centre does hold. And it can't and it won't if people don't believe that they can manage to achieve a good life of prosperity and opportunity despite politics and government, as opposed to because of them. They've got to be able to believe that they can manage to achieve that. So I won't be back again as Taoiseach here, and it's an opportunity to say thanks to Chicago and thanks to America for the opportunity to explain what Ireland is about, what Ireland as part of Europe is about. And I've said this to European leaders. Clearly, there is a unique requirement now for Europe to work with America as the two most developed regions on this planet, to define where the opportunities are, to define the road ahead in terms of job opportunities and giving young people the chance to have their dreams. So if you haven't been back to Ireland, and Niamh tells me that her father and my own father were trained as teachers many years ago in Ireland. If you haven't been back there, the country's changed. It will never be the same again. But you can go back to where your ancestors came from. You can find the spot, you can find the location, you can feel the spirit, you can understand that it is from that location that people came to America. I was in Toronto just a few weeks ago, and in Toronto in 1847, 34,000 people arrived from Ireland on what we called coffin ships filled with typhoid and fever. The population of Toronto then was only 20,000. And yet that country opened its arms, as did America, to people coming here who've made such a difference. And that's what I tried to say down in Washington this St. Patrick's Week, when I reminded people that when they listened to the words of the national anthem, about the land of the free and the home of the brave, that for many Irish, 50,000 estimated, live in the limbo land of shadows of undocumented Irish here. And we made the point that of the 5,000 medals of valor given out by the Defence Forces in the United States, that 2,500 of those have gone to the Irish. You can understand and appreciate what it means. And as I reminded the President, that just because they're here undocumented doesn't mean they're any less brave or capable of contributing to America than their forefathers were. In fact, they are as brave, but they're not as free, because if Mammy dies or Daddy dies, they can't go back home. That requires political action to bring those people out into the centre light, to give them the opportunity to play their part in the building up of this great nation. So, you know, in that sense, it was down in the White House just a few years ago, when one of the tenors there who gave a little performance at the lunch hosted by former Speaker Boehner, in a song written by Brendan Graham, an Irish songwriter, co-written by him, called "Oh America," the words where I hear you calling, you're calling me to be true to thee, and true to thee I will be. I think it was President Kennedy who said, you know, together we shall save this planet, or together we shall perish in its flames. Here's an opportunity at a time of great crisis in the world on so many issues where we should be far closer together in the politics of what we have to do, the democratic politics of what we have to do, the democratic politics of the centre ground, of centre right and left, listening to voices, all the voices, and acting in the interests of our common humanity. Enjoy your breakfast, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Taoiseach. We have about 10 minutes for questions, so if you could raise your arms and wait for the mic and make sure your question is a brief one. Yes, right here, please. Caroline Craycraft. The mic, Caroline, please.
From County Carlow. Taoiseach, the soft border between Northern Ireland and the Republic was a critical element in the Good Friday Agreement. Will that now be undone if a hard border has to be re-established? And what will the Unionists do? Thank you.
Will I take that one?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Question's a good question, thank you. When Brexit's finished, the only land border will run from Dundalk to Derry. That traditional border of customs posts, which were militarised, brought with it sectarian violence for 30 years, 3,000 people dead, killed, blown up, murdered, and so on like that. We're not going back there. We have an agreement, political imprimatur, with the British government and with the predecessor of Prime Minister May, Prime Minister Cameron, that there will be no return to a hard border, and there won't be a return to a hard border. But we have recognised that even if you have no tariffs applying on goods that travel between the Republic and Britain, or Britain and Ireland, or Britain and the European Union, you still have two different jurisdictions, and you've got to find a way of being able to manage that effectively. Now, minds in the revenue commissioners and those who are experts in trade are looking at ways of doing this. But when this is finished, there will not be a situation where you drive from Dundalk to Belfast and you pass through a formal customs post like there used to be. Prime Minister May herself has said that she does not favour that, and we're not going there. So whatever about technology or digitisation, the politics rule this. because remember that, as you're well aware, the Good Friday Agreement was voted on in 1998, long before Brexit was ever conceived in the minds of those who didn't tell the truth about what it meant. In any event, the position is that the Good Friday Agreement was quite visionary in that it sets out the opportunity for people in Northern Ireland, North and South, if they wish by democratic consent and vote to join the Republic, that both governments would recognise that. So at some time in the future, if it was apparent that there was a wish to do that, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland could trigger that border poll, could trigger a poll in Northern Ireland. We've gone further now by recognising what the Good Friday Agreement also contains, is that the situation is that the 6 counties are part of the United Kingdom as the outcome of that Good Friday Agreement. But if, when they've left, at some time they decide to want to join the Republic, that the entire island would be recognised by the European Union as being a full member of the European Union without the 6 counties having to reapply to join. This is an important issue to understand, that the Good Friday Agreement is not impacted by Brexit. The Brexit issue is about trade on so many fronts, and one of those is that there's a political imprimatur now. There will not be a return to the border of the past, custom post, people in peaked caps stopping vehicles. We've got to find a different way of engagement between the 2 different jurisdictions.
Next question, please. Really, you've stumped them with everything you've said. Oh, there's one right there. David Sheffer, Ambassador David Sheffer, please.
Sir, my ancestors come from Bennett's Bridge, so I'm quite proud of that.
Cats, yeah.
In light of President Trump's visit to Europe recently, do you have any lingering concerns about America's commitment to NATO and in particular to Article 5?
I think the President made his comments at NATO. They weren't well received by Europe, I have to say. That's the point I make, that the European Union and the United States, 2 of the most advanced regions on the planet, should be able to work in a far more constructive fashion together. There isn't any point in one or other lecturing about what might or might not be. There's an opportunity here to work together. Now, the TTIP arrangement, which was the proposal to have serious trade links between Europe and the United States, fell flat. I actually believe that that can be revived in a different way, and that there's the opportunity to create a couple of million jobs either side of the Atlantic. But you can't do it by international megaphone diplomacy. It's got to be worked upon in a way that people can understand what the function of the European Union is, how it operates, how it is that you work as a union. And the real value of that union is that in a population of 500 million people, that you can have freedom of movement of goods and people, of services and of capital. Now, as you know, London is an international global financial hub for very many years. But when it leaves the European Union, you have a situation now where banks and financial houses are making decisions that they want to be part and have access to the single market. They want to have access to European money. They want to have access to a country that speaks English, and most importantly, that they have access to a churn of talent, which will be required for new products that will come on stream. Where NATO is going to be over the next number of years has been responded to in part by Chancellor Merkel recently by saying, if America is not going to be our ally in the future, then we're going to have to move forward on our own. This is not the way we should be. Because I think we have so much common ground that we can work on as a European Union and with the United States. So there's a challenge here for Europe, genuinely, to be able to explain to this new administration, which is very different, about the mechanics, the reasoning, the background, the progress, and the way that the European Union actually operates. Because America does not do individual trade deals with individual countries. You do them with the Union, with the value of the Union is the 500 million market with those accesses to freedom of movement of capital, services, people, and of goods. And it's in there the future of work and the future of those trading relationships are cast. In terms of the geopolitics, I think we've got to think beyond Brexit. We've got to think what is the agenda of the European Union for the next 20 years. We have to deal with the questions of Putin's Russia, of the whole geopolitics of the Middle East, of Saudi Arabia, the war in Yemen, the difficulties in Syria, the support for Assad, Iran, Hamas, Kurds, the migration across the Mediterranean. Last year, 181,000 crossed from Libya to Italy. None of those were Libyan people. They were all from North African countries in the Horn of Africa. And in the next 20 years, 800 million people will live in the Nile Basin. If even 10% were to emigrate, no country in Europe would withstand that kind of pressure. And because we lost 1 million to the Atlantic ourselves with coffin ships, we've only a small navy as a non-aligned country and neutral country, we sent down our navy to the Mediterranean, and they pulled 15,000 men, women and children from the waters last year, and they're down there now as we speak at the moment. So these are matters, I think, that should be discussed rationally and in a common sense fashion by politicians at the highest level, so they can work out a common agreement for the protection of humanity.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's unfortunately all we have time for today, but we're delighted that the Taoiseach came to visit in his last days in office, and wish him all the best in his post-public service life. It's been, you said 42 years? 42 years you've been in the Dáil, right?
42.
42 years. Well, we commend you for your service.
27, I think.
Wonderful. Please join me in thanking him.